recording should be. I'll just wait for it to fire up. Okay. So share content again. Just get on the. Okay. So deja vu. We're now looking at techniques for collaboratively working with stakeholders. So let's test your knowledge. What could we do here? From last time, what sort of things would you approaches could we use in the context of your project?
Setting up consultation meetings.
Okay.
So rather than you just saying this is how it's going to be done, they might have more knowledge that they can share. So yeah, a bit of negotiation to come to a solution that suits both parties.
That sounds really good, and that's almost and the stakeholders one. We looked at the benefits, didn't we, of working with stakeholders, and also the challenges. And that's like the benefits, isn't it? Actually utilising their skills rather than sort of that sounds a really good approach. So yeah, we're starting up consultations. What frameworks could we use in this?
Ricey.
Yeah, because then we could identify the responsible, accountable, work out where people fit on it. They've got sorry, say again.
I was going to say, could you use the ABC?
The building trust. I think you could. I think the models that I've got in the slides, I think they're better ones that we used last time actually. Because there was the stakeholder engagement planning sort of section, wasn't there, that you'd got, which I think could be useful as well. By the way, not all of these can be. You've got 325 words, so it's really a case of almost you could focus on the consultations. That would work really well, and sort of talk about how they would happen, how you create this sort of two-way communication and sort of agree things. So you could, I think you just need to focus on some of these. So we've got the or if you're going to use Racey, talk about how you'd apply that and how you'd use it to work collaboratively. So keep coming back to the questions. It's all about collaboration. It's all about your project. We've got a process here that we could go through that's almost like the stakeholder engagement, where we're getting all the sort of different insights. Would the insights come from the what process do you call it when you do the public consultations? Well, it'd be wider than that, wouldn't it? Because it's not just the public that are the stakeholders, isn't it? I suppose this is the initial thing where you're specking out how do you go about doing that in terms of specifying who the stakeholders are? What's the process for your projects when they're doing that?
I think it can, the age-old question of I think it can vary depending on kind of the extent of the project. And how we would go about it is have a bit of a mapping session with all parties in the room in terms of us as delivery partners, Highways England maybe as the client, all in the room, because then you've got the depth and breadth of knowledge from across the parts.
Okay.
So have stakeholders that have been identified before that you can kind of take through as well as identifying new ones.
Brilliant. And then are they categorized in any way? Because this is what we sort of did last time, wasn't it?
Yeah, they'll be grouped to kind of themes and kind of how they are going to impact, whether they're high, medium or low kind of threat to the project. And then also by kind of like if you're doing a route that's got a lot of walkers, you've got all of the different walking groups in the area, but they kind of pool into one as opposed to kind of directly consulting with all of them at all the times.
Yeah. Okay, so sort of through interest. So you could use the apparent interest matrix as well to sort of prioritise, just because we have got a challenge here that we can't. We've got limited resource, whatever we're doing, so we just need to have some prioritisation in terms of our communication plan. So yeah, the prioritisation and number 5 here, and then you've got your strategies and how you're going to communicate, monitor and review. But actually collaboration isn't just about communicating. Sounds very much a one-way street, whereas actually when we were talking about, we opened this up and there was a suggestion about a sort of a dialogue really, and getting together with them. That's very different and negotiating to just telling people. So we can sort of try and identify who they are and then what their different perspectives are, which you've done, and then categorize them. Another way of doing it is whether they support the project, whether they're indifferent or whether they're antagonists. So what sort of level of, I think you mentioned before, what level of risk, and also identifying what the relationship's like at the moment with them. So I think I've also heard today mention of counsellors. You know, there's some key high profile people, aren't there, who can cause difficulties on projects because of their sort of public persona. So it's sort of working out what they already feel, what we've got, what relationships have we got. Just, I mean, one way of doing it is to, you could do a sort of an example of your stakeholders and just sort of almost copy this as the, not copy but adapt it to give a sort of feel for what their expectations are. So then we can work more collaboratively because we've got so expectations of what they're going to provide, but also expectations of what their expectations versus our expectations of them. I think that this could work quite well actually, because if you've got not very much, we've got a very limited word count, this gives a good overview specific to your project. So yeah, I would recommend, I think this one will be quite a good one to do. And then we could also map them in terms of low and interest, you know, what we've done before, their power and how interested they are. But also we've got here the flip of the positive and the negative. So whether they are on board, because actually that can change as well. And that's the whole thing with the power interest matrix, is that we can we need to continue to plot them anyway in terms of collaboration. Do you remember any of the other? So we've got, I mean, there's lots of models that we can use in terms of sort of plotting where they are, and then there are communication plans that we can create with them to sort of engage with them. So yeah, all this is sort of stuff that we've been familiar with in the past. How else can we collaborate? Because again, we're coming back here to communications and active versus passive. But what, I'm not sure that directly. I think there are better ways to collaborate than communicating at people. Have you got any ideas? What are the things, what's worked for you in terms of collaboration in your projects? How you've got stakeholders on board?
I think it's regular communication. I think people really appreciate being liaised with, even if, you know, it's just a couple of minutes or picking up the phone. I think especially now at the moment in like a virtual world, people just like to be talked to and engaged with, and I think that's something I'll try and do, and it's enhances success, I would say.
Oh, that sounds really good. And actually what you could do is you can, because that's active, isn't it? I think my slides have gone again. So when you're saying about sort of engaged with, we are talking here about making sure that we're talking with, because you were saying picking up the phone, so that's not, you're not talking at them, it's with them, isn't it? And then if you're doing that now and again, you then can still do some passive ones then, just to give them an update, just to do this. So you don't, not all of it has to be that, but if there's enough of that, they feel listened to, don't they, rather than just sort of talked at. So in terms of the sort of options that we've got, you were talking about a phone call, weren't you? Are there other things that are, because we tried, someone was talking last time, weren't they, about video conferencing as a public consultation, and it was more of a one-to-one than it was ever meant to be, wasn't it? 'Cause only one person attended. How is it going sort of online at the moment in terms of consultations and getting stakeholders involved, or are we limited a bit because of?
I think it's interesting because some of the projects that are having to do virtual consultations are having to think outside the box of how else they can do it. and engaging, because you go to an area, you understand what their demographic is, and if you've got a demographic that isn't tech savvy, then you can't do a virtual engagement, because you're going to miss out the bulk of the people who can't access the survey online. So it's how you can get around that. And I know people have been doing different things like flyering to say, there's a survey for this, if you want to give your thoughts, go to this library, because you'll be able to do the survey online there if you haven't got the tech at home, sort of thing. So it's understanding, I think it's really fundamental to understand the demographic of the location, to about how you then communicate, and in this virtual world, how that's handled.
This goes back to the vulnerable groups, doesn't it? Because actually you could be discriminating against them because they haven't got the income to buy things, or that or they haven't got the tech. So you've got that. And I think one of the things that, you usually have surveys that can go out physically, and like a letter drop, and I think that's been reduced as well because of the touch points with the current situation. So virtual has been the kind of go-to place, and I'm working on a project at the moment where they did a consultation I think 2 years ago, and they got X respondents. We've had to do it virtually this time because of the situation, and we've actually doubled the amount of respondents to the consultation, which is really good, because they thought we were going to be reduced because of the demographic and what have you, but it's actually doubled, and it's been a really positive experience for people. I just wonder if the profile will change though of who has responded.
And
is it anonymous, so you wouldn't know?
No, well, there's the kind of opt-in, opt-out questions of gender, age, etc. So if people have opted in, they've got that, and it has the initial findings were it had captured a lot more of those people that would have been at work when the consultation was going on. So it's captured the younger people, because they haven't physically got to go and speak to anybody, they can do it online. So I think it is opening up a different kind of demographic, but also cognizant of not losing that kind of other demographic as well. So I think it's interesting.
It is, and it's challenging. Was someone else going to say something? Oh, I thought I was thank you, that's helpful. So in terms of like keeping your stakeholders engaged, and as things are happening, what mechanisms are used to keep people posted, to keep stakeholders up to date? So we've got the bits where we're asking them for feedback, which is like the surveys, the consultations, and then we've got the bits where actually it's started, so we need to keep people informed. How can we do it? Or how do you do it?
We have I've worked on projects where we've done kind of updates via email, local newspapers, local community boards, Facebook, social media, to try and get the message out there. And I think we have metrics in the Highways England Collaborative Performance Framework, the CPF, that we have to target, which talk about how we engage with the local community. And that can be things like we've done in our operations division, name the snowplow. You get local schools to kind of come up and name things, and that then feeds into STEM activities that then feed into how we then update. We're doing this project in the local area, and these are all of the good social engagement pieces we've done to go with it. Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about the actual, it's about engagement, isn't it? It's about generating interest and awareness. Okay. Go on, HS2, speak. What do you, because you've got a really interesting challenge, haven't you, in terms of sort of collaboration with stakeholders? So what sort of, are you aware of what techniques are going on to do this?
We do all this. We do all the standard stuff as well. It's just that what we do is written into our contract, so we have a contractual obligation to to do all these things and have certain deadlines for speaking to communities, and if we're closing certain areas, closing certain roads, there are certain deadlines that we have to abide by as part of the contract that's linked to the Act again, as to how often we have to engage with people at certain levels and how close they are to certain receptors. So we hold the webinars, they do the letter drops. There you can sign up to email blast groups as well, depending on your area. And then the community engagement teams are all embedded into our Sublot projects as well. So they come to a lot of the meetings, so they are proactive in engaging with trying to spot things coming up in advance. So it is obviously so high profile.
You must have a huge PR budget, mustn't it? I imagine.
Must be massive. Yeah, I don't know the costs. I don't know how they split the costs, because there's some like client led. I imagine it's the same with HE. We have BBV community engagement, but we also have HS2, our client community engagement teams as well. They're pushing like an overall route wide message, whereas we also on the ground are very specific just for our teams, like the local man that lives on the corner but near our access or something. He might not care about the overall how HS2 in London Euston tunnels are going, but he wants to know what is happening in his very specific area.
Have you guys on HS2? You mentioned Vinci. Have you been involved with the SOMAD days? And do you know what they are?
Yeah, stand out, make a difference. I've not actually done a SOMAD day, no. I've done school events and like STEM stuff, but I've not done a SOMAD, no.
Tell us about that then. So what is SOMAD?
Well, it's like an engagement thing, isn't it, with the local communities, where the project offers the volunteers for the day who will go and do something positive in the local community. I don't know what you've seen in yours, Dan. I've only done one myself. We had to go and dredge a riverbed in somewhere near Maidenhead, because it was basically affecting. All the rivers were getting totally like congested in Maidenhead town centre because of all whatever's not pollution or anything. It's just like they were getting overgrown with like a weed. And in the depths of winter, like there's a group of about 8 or 10 of us who were in our waders in the river pulling out weeds all day long. But you know, it's not like it's a bit of an off the wall one, because it's not like really an engagement formally where you talk about the project, but it is a kind of an informal mechanism of maintaining relations.
Well, it makes you look like you're on the same page, doesn't it? In the sense of all bothered about the local community, doesn't it? That you're not just but it does sound like sort of community service, doesn't it? What you were doing.
We
didn't have the bracelet around the ankle, but other than that.
Yeah, we do that on a project level. So across Amy, we have something called Community Involvement Days, which is a day we can just do very much like what Stephen was saying. But what we try to do to kind of concentrate efforts, instead of just people going and volunteering at the local food bank or what have you, is on a project basis trying to do something that impacts the area where our project is being delivered. So we've done, I think I was working on a project and we went and helped the local church who wanted their garden back that was overgrown with brambles, and there was about 40 of us trying to like clear the path for them. And yeah, it sounds a lot, 40 people for one day, but by the end of it it was clear, and you know, the church were then very kind of like forthcoming with any help, and you know, gave us things that we could utilize. So it's a really good thing, and that we're offered, and I think if you can make it so it's around the project and around the area that you're working on, it really helps.
That's it's this idea of I can't say it right, but reciprocity, I think it's called. And there's a sort of psychology behind it, in terms of if you give something, the idea that actually it isn't that you expect it back, but in return people want to do something back. And they've even there's because I sort of do it in terms of when the sales and marketing courses that are run, there's some research about if you went to an Indian takeaway and they give you a little spirit afterwards, so they say, what would you like for drink? So they're not charging you for it, so you have your Baileys or whatever. The chances of the tip that you will give afterwards is disproportionate to what it would have been if they just gave you an after 8 mint. So there's this, and I know that doesn't sound like it's a similar thing, but it is in some ways, because it's this idea, once we do something, then actually there's you're fostering something which you're investing above and beyond the initial contract, if you like, the initial sort of what expectation. And I think particularly with community groups, actually, that's because that's almost building on their sort of spirit, isn't it? The sense of community. And actually doing something like that, that's a very visual way, isn't it? Clearing the you know, for the whole community to see as well. So
and that can get published in our community forums to say, guys, you know, we've done this for the local area, and it sends out that positive message that we're not just there to take away, we're there to kind of well.
My 4-year-olds say, you're not just the bad guys, are you? It's the yeah, okay. Thank you. There's some good examples there. Some interesting examples actually in terms of like sort of how we can engender and yeah. So just in terms of how we're going to approach this. So again, 325 words, not many, just sort of 3 paragraphs really, 3 and a bit maybe. So it's ideas on how you can build consensus. So you may do that through some sort of negotiation exercise. You might not. So you're agreeing to share goals, you're coming up with a communication plan, but you're actually making sure that you honour it as well. I suppose there's an issue that anything that you set out that you've actually that can be captured and stored, there is no way you can go back on that then when it's promised. So there's a sort of transparency that comes with that as well, and potentially getting the stakeholders more involved in terms of the empowering them. And then, you know, how does that happen? Is it the whole team that's involved with it? Who the stakeholders are? You know, how you're creating, and actually how do you quantify them? So whether you're using a Reiki, whether you're using the internal, external, connected, whether you're using the power versus interest, that can be helpful just to sort of really map out those relationships when you're thinking about the level of communications. So I think that's like your last assignment in about, you know, a 10th or a 20th of the amount, isn't it really? But it's just sort of looking at those techniques and applying it to your project, what works best. And there's not, you know, there's some ideas here about what you could use, but it's not that there isn't a wrong one. It's what's appropriate to your project. Okay. Comfortable if I'm going to say stop recording that, start recording again, doing the usual stop-start here. Stop recording.